In the field of psychometrics, test utility refers to the usefulness of a test. So we try to evaluate if a test has a practical value. For example, in a decision making, we also want to know the cost and benefit and even the savings that the institution or company might have when we use a test or assessment tool. With this, we will go back to the essence of a sound psychometric test. Again, when we say sound psychometric test, it has characteristics such as objectivity, validity, reliability, and of course, utility. The term test utility is referring to the usefulness again or practical value of a test. So generally, a test that has high criterion related validity may also likely have a high utility, but this may not always be true. For example, in an applicant selection process, let us say that there is a high ratio of applicants for a specific job. So the test takers may score high with the test, thus the test might measure what it is supposed to measure, and yet not all test takers or applicants may proceed with their application even so. So our applicants fail the test where of course the test materials will cost the company or institution with the materials being used during the testing procedures. Again, although the test has high criterion related validity, it may not always be true that such a testing procedure has high practicality. Okay, so as test users, we may also consider the utility of a test depending on several factors that we will be discussing later on. So later we will learn more of these factors and consider some methods to actually measure utility. Now, let us first discuss some of the factors we consider in test utility. This may generally include the cost and benefits. So for the cost, as used with decisions can be commonly identified with expenses related to testing other factors related to it. So this is not just limited, let's say, for example, purchasing of the test and number of the test takers who may pass or fail, and yet some of them did not proceed with the application, for example, or test takers who might be able to utilize this material. So the term cost are most likely associated with several factors such as funding of the particular test, supply of the test protocols, or some of the companies utilize computerized testing processes such as for the scoring, interpretation of the test scores from the test publisher, or some independent service. So apart from materials being used during the test procedure, we also consider the cost for the payment of professional personnel and staff associated with test administration, scoring, and interpretation. And of course, we utilize some of the facilities, rental, we also have the mortgage and other charges related to usage of the test facility. And of course, we also consider some of the legal procedures or some insurance, legal and accounting, licensing, and other routine costs of doing a business. Okay, we may now ask how institutions be able to afford these expenses. So in some settings, you might be able to walk in to some private clinics. Now, these costs may be compensated in terms of the revenue or income. This might be in form of payment from the test takers. All right. So in other settings, researchers, colleges or universities or some research organizations, these costs will be paid. Be likely paid through funding such as private donation or government grants. So after knowing the cost, we will now proceed with the benefits. So same with the evaluation of the cost, okay, incurred by the testing. Test users also compare the benefits accumulated from testing such as the profits, the gains, or some of the advantages. Okay. So when we talk about benefits, this includes the economic and non-economic terms. So in terms of the economic benefits, for example, in an industrial and organizational setting, a test user may utilize a test with a high utility that exhibits a selection of employees who can produce more when compared with other employees. So this testing program tends to estimate more productive employees, which can lead to a more profitable outcome. Okay, so apart from economic benefits, there are also potential non-economic benefits from testing programs. Let us say, for example, in an industrial and organizational setting, a good testing and assessment program may likely increase the quality of workers' performance and, of course, decrease the expense for some unnecessary training programs, for example, and may even reduce accidents and worker turnover. So generally, having a good testing and assessment programs can save resources for the institution, resources such as money, time, and energy. All right. So after giving you a picture of utility, that is of course the practical use of the test, when it comes to cost and benefits, economic and non-economic gains, and we will now proceed with analyzing utility. So yes, just like reliability and validity, test users are subject to analyze utility with some techniques existing. Okay, so utility analysis will help us learn some of the important insights in using tests, such as learning what test or assessment tool is preferable for a specific purpose. Let us say, for example, if hiring an employee, should we use a standardized test? Or should we buy the whole protocol? Or given the time and budget that the institution has? Or should the test user utilize other assessment tools apart from standardized testing? So such as behavioral observation, interview, assessment of portfolio, and the like. So, okay. So we may also ask ourselves as test users, no, if it is practical to use one or more tests aside from the existing tools that we have. So this kind of evaluation is not just limited to testing. So utility analysis can also be used in implementing training programs or interventions, basically to ask the question of practicality. Okay. So now let's talk about the tools and techniques that we may use to analyze utility. First, we have expectancy table or chart. So this tool shows the percentage of test taker within specified test score interval. So in a school setting, for example, a teacher may plot the performance of students on test score intervals and criterion such as poor performance, average, above average, and excellent, for example. And then later on, these results can be reference for the student's future performance on a given criterion. So the expectancy table can be drawn using a graphical display or table, like it is composed of the score criterion, a number of people who scored within particular interval, percentage of people within interval, or cases per test score interval. So this is to help the test users in decision making. With its usefulness, however, this analysis does not address monetary issues such as the cost of the testing or return on investment of testing. Next, we have the Taylor-Russell tables. Now, Taylor-Russell tables help the test user understand an estimate of the percentage of employees hired by use of particular test who will be likely successful at their jobs. So given different combinations of three variables such as test validity, number one. The second one is the selection ratio being used, and the third one is the base rate. For example, a human resources manager uses the Taylor-Russell table. So to help to decide whether applicants or for sales position, for example, should be administered an extraversion and conscientiousness personality inventory before hiring. Okay, so the manager wants to increase the portion of the sales force that is considered successful or on a sales force that consistently meets the sales quota, for instance, by using an estimate of the test validity, okay, the current base rate, and the selection ratio, the manager can estimate now whether the increase in the proportion of the sales that does successfully meet their quotas will justify the cost of testing all sales applicants. All right. So just like in expectancy table, the Taylor-Russell tables is also likely easy to use, and it is also shows the relationships between the selection ratio, criterion related validity, and existing base rate. It can also facilitate decision making with regard to test use and or recruitment to lower the selection ratio. All right. So next one, we have the Naylor Shine uh, tables. Now, Naylor Shine tables help the test user identify the average increase in criterion performance as a result of using particular test or intervention. So it can also give us insight into the selection ratio needed to achieve a particular increase in criterion performance. This can also provide the information needed to use the with the use of Brogden-Cronbach-Gleiser utility formula. So which refers to the estimate of the benefit or monetary of using the particular test or selection method. So to learn more about how to practically conduct Taylor-Russell tables, Naylor-Shine tables, the Brogden-Cronbach-Lesser or BCG formula, you may click the link provided in our presentation. So let us proceed with some practical considerations in conducting utility analysis, such as pool of job applicants, the complexity of the job, and the cut score. All right. So for the pool of job applicants, many utility models are constructed on the assumption that all people selected by the personal test will likely accept the position that they are offered. So, however, this is not always the case. Okay, it is suggested that most likely top performers on the test are individuals who, because of their superior abilities, all right, are also being offered positions by other potential employers. So that means the top performers of the test are least likely be hired. Okay, so thus utility estimates can be adjusted to somewhat 80% in order to provide a more realistic estimate of the utility of the tool or assessment used for selection purposes. Next, we have the complexity of the job. Okay, so complexity of the job suggests that people differ on how well or poorly they do that job. So whether or not the same utility analysis methods are equally applicable. And lastly, the consideration of the cut score or the cut-off score. Now, which is defined as numerically, usually numerically, reference point derived as a result of the judgment and used to divide a set of data into two or more classifications. Usually, test users make inference based on these classifications. Also, we have different types of cut scores and cut score methods, more likely divided into two major types. Okay, so we have the relative cut score and the fixed cut score. Okay, so a relative cut score can be based on group performance or norm reference considerations rather than relying on criterion to define the score. So in contrast, the fixed cut score or criterion reference cut score can be defined by the division of two or more classification data or data concerning minimum level of proficiency required to be included in a particular classification. All right. So when we talk about fixed cut scores, this may include multiple cut scores and multi-stage or multiple hurdle cut scores. Okay. So, okay. For this one, unlike multiple hurdle approach that involves crossing one hurdle or stage at a time and given a score for each stage passed, the multiple cut-off approaches involve considering the scores of the candidates simultaneously based on variety of assessments. For example, with multiple cut scores, where two or more cut scores with a reference to one predictor for the purpose of categorizing test takers can be used by the instructor but may use multiple cut scores in a test. So after a test, each test taker or student, for example, we will be assigning one category based on test performance. For example, the test scores may be categorized to A, B, C, D, or F. Okay, so where A being the highest and F as the lowest. On the other hand, the multi-stage or multiple hurdle, it is designed to ensure that each test taker possesses some minimum level of specific knowledge, skill, or ability. For example, an applicant may have a successfully meet some standard in order to move to the next stage of assessment in series of stages of what we call the hurdles. All right. So next one, there are several reasons why we have to set these cut scores. For example, in an educational setting, we have to qualify best applicants for particular programs or qualifying certified or licensed professionals, for example. Or in an industrial setting, we have to know who will be most qualified to for employment or promotion, for example, or among motorists who are most qualified to drive a four-wheel drive, okay, or motorcycle, for example, and who are the most qualified to drive several types of vehicle. Okay, so there are several reasons. So okay, after knowing the major types of cut scores, we will now discuss the methods for setting cut scores. Although there is no universal cut score method, it is more useful to consider the following methods in implementing either fixed or relative cut score. Okay, first, we have the Enghoff method. So it can be used for setting fixed cut scores during personal selection, for example, and identifying presence or absence of particular trait, attribute, or ability. So you can just click the link if you want to know more about how to compute this Enghoff method. So when used for the purposes of personal selection, experts in the area provide estimates regarding how the test takers who have the least minimal competence for the position should answer test items correctly. So as applied for the purposes relating to the determination of whether or not test takers possess a particular trait, attribute, or ability. So an expert panel makes judgments concerning the way a person with the trait, attribute, or ability would respond to the test items, for example. So in both cases, the judgments or the experts are average to yield cut scores, okay, for the test. So persons who score at or above the cut score are considered high enough to the ability to be high or to be sufficiently high in the trait, attribute, and ability that we are trying to measure. Okay. So next one, we have the known groups. Okay, the known groups method of contrasting groups is based on the analysis of possessed and not possessed traits or characteristics by using cut score set on the test that best discriminates the two groups test performance. For example, in setting cut scores for clinical measure of depression, for instance, a test user may infer the level of characteristics of depressed group, for instance, compared with the group of respondents who appear to have normal characteristics. So the main problem with using known groups for is that determination of where to set the cutoff score is inherently affected by the composition of the contrasting groups. With this, we may analyze the data or data using descriptive statistics, or we may also utilize statistics such as t-test or analysis of variance to compare both groups. Okay. So next we have the IRT-based method. So IRT-based methods are based on the IRT framework or the item response theory. So where each item is associated with particular level of difficulty. So in order to pass the test taker must answer items that are deemed to be above minimum level of difficulty, which is determined by experts and serves as the CAT score. Compared with classical test score theory, CAT scores are typically set based on test takers' performance across all the items of the test. So some portion of the total number of items on the test must be scored correct, or in a way that indicates the test taker possesses the target trait or attribute. In order for the test taker to pass the test or the deemed to be possessed targeted trait or attribute. Okay, so after knowing the general picture of IRT and classical test score method and other forms of cut-off score method, we will now proceed with other types of cut-off score method. Now, we have the item mapping method. So the mapping method is composed of arrangement of items in a histogram, okay, with expert judgments regarding item effectiveness. For example, licensed psychometricians who have been trained regarding some minimal competence required for licensure are asked to answer sample items from each column and are asked whether or not minimally competent licensed individual would answer those items correctly about the half of the item. So if experts agree, then the test developer has to establish difficulty level as the cut score. Okay? If not, the test developer may continue to find appropriate difficulty level based on experts' judgment. So typically, the process involves several rounds of judgment in which experts may receive feedback regarding how their ratings compare to ratings made by other experts. So aside from item mapping method, we also have the bookmark method. So this method includes the experts who are given a book of items with one item printed per page. So such that items are arranged in ascending order of difficulty. So the expert then literally places a bookmark on items that exhibit an optimal level of difficulty, which serves as the cut score. However, some concerns raised about the bookmarking method include issues regarding the training of experts, possible floor and ceiling effects, right, and the optimal length of item booklet. So other cut score methods include the Hambleton and Novick 1973's presented a decision theoretic approach to setting cut scores, which deals with quantitative evaluation of procedures in terms of how optimal procedures are when it comes to cost-benefit perspective. We also have the Edward L. Thorndike 1949's proposed norm reference method for setting cut score called the method of predictive yield. It is a technique for identifying cut scores based on the number of positions to be filled, or the considerations of offer acceptance and the number of position openings and the distribution of applicant scores. All right. So we also have the Wayne Casio's prolific research in the area of test utility. He proposed this use of regression for setting cut scores when criterion-related data or data are available, where of course the test user has to infer on the relationship among variables involving the criterion and observed scores. All right, to understand how one variable may predict another, on the other hand, we also have the discriminant analysis. So discriminant analysis, the test user may infer on the relationship between certain variables such as the scores on the battery of tests, and the two, and in some cases, use the naturally occurring groups such as the persons judged to be successful on the job and persons judged to not to be successful on the job. All right, so in this lesson, we have learned the practicality of testing. That is, of course, knowing some of the costs and benefits, some of the practical considerations in using a test or assessment, and some of the methodologies of identifying cutoff scores. And again, in the previous lessons, we also discussed objectivity, reliability, validity, which are also included in our video description. All right. So you may also want to visit them for your reference. So next lecture series, we will discuss test development, where we will learn more about how psychometric test is being constructed. So thank you so much for listening, and I will see you in the next video.